for someone to sit here and normalize or minimize what something is happening that's normalizing hate crimes where death, violence, and bitterness is actually happening against African Americans, it's not a small thing that someone should just completely dismiss or look the other way for, or say, well, it's still a good thing overall because this is something we can stand behind, even if it's going to result in now more work, meaning more blood, more sweat, more tears, more problems, all of these things in order for us to undo this seemingly passive, seemingly innocuous thing that you're trying to minimize. That's why it's such a problem.
Hoping for something more.
Yeah, man, you know, it's coming from Tariq Nasheed, and I'm expecting him to bring that fire, you know, like he does on his Twitter. And he just did not deliver. It was DiGiorno.
Have you seen his Instagram?
No, is it amazing?
He's got very strong opinions about things.
I gotta get on that Instagram. That seems like it should be amazing. I can only imagine. Dang, yeah, I need that. I'm gonna be checking that out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have to do that. I feel like you're being radicalized on the internet right now. Like, I don't know if it's responsible to show this documentary. Like,
I mean, listen, I just need the truth.
Content.
I need the truth, and Tariq normally brings it, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, so we could watch a bit of it. We could also talk about like what are some of the things that you like especially like really like about him. So like we
don't put me on the spot. I don't want to say.
no, I mean we don't have to do that right now. We don't have to whatever, you know. But I mean, like we watched or forget how did we actually do it? I think I watched the Cosby documentary. You watched me watching or not documentary, but like his video on it, and then you watched my stream, and then we discussed it.
I really like that video. I like that. Maybe why don't we do that? Why don't we watch that video and commentate on that video together?
I don't know if I don't think I watched that again. We could do some of it. We could do some of it. Yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like he brought a ton of facts to that. Like I'm trying to think of.
Well, okay. There's one thing that I felt was like pretty poignant, and it was the fact that he referred to the idea that that this was very much a bunch of white women accusing a black man of having done something, right? Like it was a racialized issue. But the thing was, I think it's accurate to say that Gloria Allred and her demon scum decided to start painting some of these white women in literally black makeup, doing basically like low-key blackface, so that the image didn't look like it was all white people accusing this black man of something, so that they could like remove the racial element, that the racial elephant in the room. Do you think that was not true?
I have no idea. I was asking more about like other than what he said about Cosby, like what are other like types of claims or like ways that he
Oh, sure. So I guess he like
things or argues for things.
Yeah, well, when he argues for reparations, he also points out something that I think is particularly accurate, and that there is like a very obvious difference between ADOS, Foundational Black Americans, and the immigrant blacks. That there are like distinctions that like are like notable and like produce different results, and that our interests are not often aligned on a lot of issues. There's a lack of understanding when it comes to immigrants to a lot of the issues that are unique to the black Americans, the ADOS, the descendants of slavery, and our historic injustices that we've experienced in this country has shaped our worldview in such ways that they don't have an understanding of, specifically because a lot of them come over with like a lot of wealth and things like that, such that prevents them from experiencing the depth of the disgustingness that is the Americans' treatments of African Americans. And I think he touches on that a lot. I think that's something that's particular.
That's cool. Yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just yeah, I mean, this is definitely something I was thinking about in terms of like, you know, is there a certain cutoff of, you know, somebody who immigrated like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or I don't know statistically speaking what, levels of immigration from I guess, from Haiti, from Jamaica, from the African continent. Like I don't, I don't know statistically like what those waves were percentage wise of people, but um
Sure.
so
Well,
so
there
like when
wasn't
he
a
talks about
significant.
reparations, would that be like literally only if you could trace your ancestry, or if it was, if you're here for the last 100 years, you got hit by redlining, you got hit by,
Sure. So
you get hit by other things.
So there's a whole bunch of different ways of like looking at reparations, and there's reparations for different things. So something like the GI Bill, which was like really restricted from black people, affected immigrant
Yep.
black people too. So any person who was a veteran, they would probably have access to that type of reparations. When it comes to reparations for things like redlining, if somebody can prove that they like purchased a house before the Fair Housing Act of 1968 or 67, I want to say, if or 68, I think it's 68. If someone can prove that they purchased a property before the passing of the Fair Housing Act, then I would think that they would be able to have access to, to the, they would have access to that form of reparations for anything the damage is done by that by redlining and the fair housing. Um, so that those things wouldn't be unique to only ADOS. Specifically, the ones that would be unique to ADOS are slavery, right? Like that's something that's unique. Maybe there might be a couple others. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but that's something that would be unique to ADOS. But plenty of forms of the other systemic oppression that we also feel needs to be addressed affected other Black people as well, and so it would be open to all of them.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So, so does he argue for some kind of like graduated level of reparations um, based on ancestry? I don't. I mean, like that's
No,
like an interesting part of. Yeah.
no, 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 no. So it's never been that way. It's not. It's not like, oh man, if you were before X time, then you just automatically get reparations. Typically, there needs to be some sort of relevant like policy or something that was in place at the time that you would be able to say that you were affected by that would probably qualify you for some form of reparations. It doesn't matter how far back your ancestry goes back. If you weren't a slave, then it doesn't make sense for you to be getting it for slavery. If you can prove, if you, there's no reason to believe, like if you have immigrant from I don't know, from Nigerian parents, it doesn't make sense for us to sit there and say, well, yeah, we'll give you reparation for slavery, even though you were never slaves. You didn't come here through that way. But if we have reason to believe that Black people within this country, because there was such a super minority of immigrant population during the times of slavery, then it was probably reasonable to say people born during that time would be slaves. If there happened to be some outliers who happen to have been immigrants from that time that weren't slaves, I don't think we would probably do great deal of restricting so as to make things more complicated. It would probably make more sense just to say during that time, if you were here, you probably qualify for it. But if we were being hyper specific and had the ability to be able to check if records were so accurate that we could be able to determine that people during that time weren't slaves, we would probably create some sort of system that says you would not be able to get it if you weren't a slave. But since we don't have that, it probably would just be blanket across the board at that specific time because of the limitations.
Yeah, I mean that all sounds pretty reasonable. And I mean I don't think he's I don't think he's the only person who argues for reparations.
No, not even
Um,
close.
does he have like some videos or content on that or like interviews or something like
Well, he tweets about it all the time. I think another thing that he does is he just points out like the abject racism that we continue to experience in this country. He's particularly ADOS focused, and ADOS still experienced quite a bit of disgustingness. Something that he just recently tweeted that I thought was absolutely appalling. There was a situation where there was this black mother who was child protective services were taking her child from her, and they ripped the kid out of her arms. Well, the cradle anyway, or the car seat it looked like. They ripped it out of her arms, like in a very jerky that could literally kill a kid. We obviously know, like shaken baby syndrome, this or whatever. And this police officers yanked this baby from this woman's arm. You should obviously have social worker for this thing. This is probably why a lot of people argue things like defund the police. But anyway, my point being, that is something that's disgusting. We recognize, even to this day, that there still happens to be some disparate treatment when it comes to people's children. The baby was not born with any drugs in its system, so it didn't seem like there was any reason for this baby to be yoinked from this woman. And even if it was born with that way, then there probably need to be social workers involved, and the police can be there to enforce if the woman is not willing to comply with the social workers. But it didn't seem like it was a situation that needed to be happening, and that's just one that happens to be caught on film. But we're aware of so many of these other ones. Also, there was that situation where there was that hotel room where that guy was freaking out, having a complete mental crisis, and like punching himself in the face and doing all sorts of nonsense and breaking his computers and all that stuff. And it seemed like the media was trying to demonize the customer in the situation who had been mistreated by this employer and by this employee who clearly didn't have the capacity to be doing his job, as opposed to looking at the employee for being employed in a position that he clearly wasn't qualified for, blaming the staff for hiring the person in that position, blaming the man for not controlling himself in such circumstances. Instead, we wanted to direct all the attention towards the black recipient of this racist behavior. And I think that right there is something that Tariq Nasheed was very, very vocal about. Like, wait, no. We're not going to shift the blame to the victim here, because this is a victim. This guy was being done wrong by this establishment, and now we're trying to say he's wrong for filming it. When a lot of times in these situations, we're required to film for our own protection, because otherwise the media will do everything in their power to demonize us and misconstrue the events so as to make us out to be the perpetrators. So I think things like that, where I feel he does a really good job of like bringing attention to some of the intentionality and the misconstruction of a lot of these stories and things like that, make Tariq Nasheed particularly valuable. That and the fact that he has such a huge platform, and so then it allows other people to have spaces in which they can communicate in his timeline and things like that, where they're talking with other like-minded individuals and other victims of this abject racism within this country, and able to discuss those things. I think that all of those things are particularly valuable, and I think Tariq Nasheed has done a really great job of providing all of those kind of structural issues, infrastructure for having those conversations. He's a great conduit. So I think it's good. I'm a fan.
Okay.
Furthermore, one other thing too, I feel like very often within the media and just within like politics in general, people have a tendency to kind of conflate all issues, specifically issues that are like blackface, and a lot of times they will try their best to broaden those conversations to all people of color, where it seems like very often a lot of attention is given to other people of color, a lot of legislation and things is passed for other people of color. A lot of movement is passed and sympathy is given to other people of color, which is oftentimes withheld from African Americans and ADOS. And so I think his intense focus on constricting the conversation to specifically ADOS, I think comes particularly beneficial when we're trying to get movement and momentum in that area, because it seems like we're always being sidelined for literally everyone else, and he doesn't do that. He focuses specifically on ADOS, which of course is something personal to me, which I'm obviously going to value. So there's just a lot that I get out of
Yeah, so
who he
that's a
is.
great that brings up something that I definitely got as kind of a general feeling looking at his Instagram. It felt very, very blatant, which was anytime there's a situation where, so there were like a number of posts that were like that were referencing something where someone was like doing like an anti-API hate, anti-Asian hate campaign.
Mhm.
Just let that ring. It's probably spam. Um, where it seemed like he's just gotta it's gonna keep ringing. Just turn that off.
All right.
Just get a million of these stupid spam calls like every day. It's awful.
You gotta call and put
Um,
yourself on the do not call list.
no, it's not even that. It's not even like spam calls. It's just like bots.
Mm.
It's so annoying. But yeah, it seems like he's not just um focused on like bringing attention to specifically ADOS, specifically FBA causes and situations. It seems like he's like actively wants to kind of like shut down, focus on other, likes me as like this is like everything
Wait,
going
you
on
wait, you
with
broke up.
this.
You broke up. Sorry,
Yeah,
you got to start over. So you said it seemed like he had focus on shutting down, and then you cut out.
everything going wrong at once. It seemed like he like it kind of feels like he's working in like a what's the phrase? Like a um it's not like it's not like a starvation mentality. There's a phrase for this where it's like where you're so low on resources that any resources going to anyone other than your group feels like a kind of personal attack. There's a fucking phrase for this, which is
Sure, but I don't think that that's what's
um
happening there.
this is bugging me so much I can't remember what
Yeah,
phrase this
sure,
is.
but I don't
Um,
think that that's what's happening there. I think it's very different. So what I think happens is when you do something like deciding to start a Stop Asian Hate movement, when Asians make up the super minority of hate crime recipients, then it seems like to put focus on and to state that this Asian thing is an alarming thing. It serves as to normalize the hate crimes against everyone else, against the majority. Does that make sense to you?
that does not make sense to me, right? So that was a response to a spike in hate crimes that
Yes,
was
a
in
spike
conjunction with
that
like
still left them as the minority.
the okay.
So
Um,
let me give you an example, okay?
mhm,
So we understand that, like on average, women are definitely the majority of people who end up being single mothers due to abandonment by fathers, correct?
sure. Okay.
Okay. So let's say those numbers are like 90-10. Women make up 90% of the single mothers due to abandonment by fathers, okay? 90-10. And it's a problem, and we all see that it's a problem. Now, what happens if all of a sudden we see a spike in, let's say, 100%? So now women make up 20% of the single of the people of people abandoning fathers. So now fathers make up 80%. Okay, and so now due to that spike, we decide to start a movement talking about stop women from abandoning their children. Do you understand when women are typically the ones that are being abandoned? When there's a spike towards women, for us to then make a movement about it, like demonizing or whatever, chastising or criticizing or calling attention to this spike for women, for men, that would normalize what's happening to women because now we're saying, hey, it's alarming that this many this many women are abandoning or whatever, which means we're ignoring now the fact that the vast majority of this thing is happening to men. By men.
Sure. So
Do you think
that's
that that would be, do you think that would be normalizing in that situation?
so I disagree in two different ways. So
Okay, good.
I yeah, so I
Do
think
you
if
disagree
you
with the analogy, or you're talking about like broadening it to the original thing? I'm saying, do you disagree with that
um
analogy that I just gave you? I need you to engage with that
I
thing.
disagree. I disagree with the analogy and I disagree within the analogy.
Okay, let's go ahead and
So
let's
we
explain to
can
me
start
what the difference would be.
together.
What within the analogy, where do you disagree?
Yeah, so within the analogy, I feel like if there's some new thing that crops up, um,
It's not new. It's just there's just a change in numbers, change in quantity. It's not new. This isn't a new thing. It's a
I don't
spike.
quite understand.
You
Yeah,
said it's a spike. You said it's a new thing that cropped up. This isn't new. This isn't some novel thing. It's not like there have never been hate crimes against Asians. Not like there have never been hate crimes against everyone else. We already have the numbers for this. There's been a spike. There's been nothing new. There's just been a change in quantity, in volume. This isn't a new thing. Hate crimes against Asians have existed for
and
since they've been here. So what do you mean new thing? What are you saying?
there's a specific phenomena related to coronavirus, right? That's like presumably the cause of a lot of this, right?
Okay.
Rhetoric from the
Are you saying
president,
you're saying an extraneous factor is new that's contributing to it? Okay, sure. Go ahead.
an extraneous factor. I don't understand.
Well, because the data is the data, but you're saying like, or an external factor, and the external factor would be the coronavirus, which is contributing towards the uptick in the hate crimes, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, well, it's the coronavirus filtered through like a number of like specific spokespeople, right? So
Yeah, but you understand that
presumably the
you
president's
understand that the
comment
hate
was
crimes
no.
existed before the for the agents before the coronavirus, right?
Yes, of
Right.
course.
So now this is an external factor aside from the typical Asian hate that is contributing to these hate crimes as well. The external factor
Well,
is a coronavirus.
so technically, there's the internal factor of like racism within America, right? Which is
Right, but then some of these attacks would come from people who wouldn't have otherwise done so, but because of the external factor of the coronavirus, have now found new hatred, and so then that's causing them to act with this thing. So then again, there's the core factor of the racism, which is just the hate crimes that have been generated. Now the external factor of the coronavirus is contributing towards this hatred of these people, right?
sure. I mean,
Okay,
it's
go
to be
ahead.
clear, it's not just like, oh, there happens to be a coronavirus. It's the fact that that there's a specific kind of like
Association?
yeah, like a
Sure,
political
of course.
association that right that's
Yeah,
like kind of like a lot of anti-China rhetoric. I'm sure,
sure, of
you know,
course. Go
goes to
ahead.
that and saying like, oh, China did this
Yeah,
to
we
us
get
or
it.
whatever,
We get it. Keep going.
right? So I think, I, but maybe this is like a semantics thing. I think
It is. Let's keep
I would
moving. Let's
describe
keep
that as a
going.
new phenomena, right?
Sure, go
There's
ahead.
a specific thing happening that's leading to this result.
Okay.
Um, of course, there's been hate crimes before that, sure. If there's some new thing happening that's causing a new wave of bad stuff on top of bad things that have been happening, I think
Hmm.
that's worth like grappling with and commenting on and trying to do things to stop.
Okay.
I don't think that that's like a crazy
N-
um,
No one's saying no, no, no. See, again, like this is really. I'm already frustrated. I don't know how much this is crazy to me. Because I feel like I went through a lot of work of like being really explaining it. We're talking about an analogy. You said you disagree with the analogy. Stay within the analogy. So in the analogy, where's something wrong with the analogy that I gave you? You said you had a disagreement within the analogy, and I asked you to stay within the analogy and explain to me what within the analogy you disagreed with. And now you've just gone back to the original conversation. So within the analogy, which part of the
sure.
analogy
Yeah.
did you disagree with? And keep it
So,
very germane and specific to the analogy.
right. So within the analogy, there's suddenly a doubling, small as it may be. I mean, in your example, is going from 10% to 20%.
Hmm.
If it was like 1% to 2%, maybe you have more of an argument. But
Oh,
anything that
but it
ends
doesn't
up
matter.
doubling
But the number is
seems like
actually
it's
okay.
worth.
Fine. Let's make it a little bit more relevant. What if it was 4% to 8%? Would I have a better argument
Yeah.
there?
I
Okay, so
mean,
let's do it that way. So 96%
sure.
of
Okay.
96% of
Mhm.
single mothers happen to be. I mean, 96% of single
Well,
parents happen to be mothers due to abandonment by fathers, and 4% of single parents happen to be fathers due to abandonment by mothers. And now there's been an uptick, like a doubling
yeah,
of
and
the of that happening.
it's the raw numbers more so than the proportion per se that I think is the most relevant thing. So
Okay.
if it just shifted, so let's say like,
From 4%
uh,
to 8%. So that's the number. That's the number I'm giving you. I'm giving you. I'm keeping this
well,
analogy
no,
consistent.
it's
No,
like
no, no, no,
100 to
no, no, no,
200,
no, no. Screw
right?
it. Screw it. Screw it. We're giving you the 4% of the problem. 4% of the abandoned parents are fathers, and now it's. I mean, and now that's jumped to 8%.
Hmm.
And the remaining 92% are mothers. What do you say
Sure.
in that situation? Would you say that it is normalizing if we then begin to vocalize an alarm at the mothers abandoning their children while we recognize that still the vast majority, 96%, I'm sorry, 92% of the people abandoning
Mhm.
parents are still fathers. I mean, are fathers. Do you think that it normalizes that to then begin to vocalize alarm at the mothers doing it when the fathers have been doing it, are continuing to doing it, are still
Mhm.
the lion's share of the people doing
I
it?
got
Does
you.
it
I got you.
normalize that?
No, I don't think that that's normalizing it. I think if there's a new bad thing that's happening, calling that out doesn't inherently normalize all other bad things that are also happening.
What if we created legislation?
Especially if it's
What if we
okay.
created legislation specifically to address fathers? I mean, mothers abandoning children, while we didn't create specific legislation to address the fathers abandoning children. Would that be normalizing?
Um, I think there's cases where it could be. Yeah,
Give me a case where it wouldn't be
where it wouldn't
in
be.
that analogy.
If there's a specific phenomenon that's occurring, um, that's that's like causing this
Okay,
particular
so
like
say the
or
phenomenon is I don't know, men in this society. Or I'm sorry, say this is a phenomenon is that there's just been an uptick in cultural awareness and liberation of women's sexuality and liberation of women in general that has led them to consider the option of just not being there for their children in order to pursue their own sexual freedom. That's the new phenomenon. There's been like a social uptick or a social awareness brought on by freaking what's that one book with something gray. I can't even think of the name of it right now. But I don't know, bought on by some media or something that's causing women to feel a lot more free and a lot more sexually explorative, and that's causing the women to now start abandoning their homes in suit of their sexual freedom. If that 50 Shades of Grey is the name of it. So 50 Shades
oh,
of Grey has given women the impetus that's made them to feel free enough that they want to go and begin looking for other outside partners, and that's caused them to start abandoning their children. Would it be normalizing in that situation to then make legislation aimed at curtailing women from doing this while we're ignoring that 92% of the problem that is happening is through men? Would that be normalizing of the men doing so?
I think in this specific analogy, I think that would be a weird thing to do to introduce legislation to do
Would
that.
it be normal? I'm not asking is it weird. The question
Would it
specifically,
be
as I asked you, would it
normalizing?
be normalizing the men to do so, to become alarmed by the women doing so, and make legislation against the women doing so when the lion's share of it happening is men doing it?
Yeah, that would probably would it be normalizing? I don't know. It's so far out there.
It's not that far, but it's fine.
Yes. Let's say yes. Sure.
I don't want you to
I
just
think
say yes.
I think
Can
it's
you
extremely
reasonably think that it's normalizing?
normalizing, right? So like you have a typical cultural practice of like men do this a lot, and then there's some new cultural practice where women start doing something similar, and then you just focus on the women doing this and disregard the fact that men are doing this. That would be normalizing, sure.
Okay. Why would it be why would it be normalizing? Explain that to me.
It would be normalizing. Um, I mean, for exactly the reason that I just said, that you have it's a um, cultural practice that's been ongoing, which is, I mean, I guess it's accepted to different levels, but
Well, it's not
there's a
accepted.
lot of
They've always complained about it. It's always
mm,
been something that we know is a bad thing.
sure.
We know it shouldn't
Well, there's
happen.
like,
But
yeah, well, there's like someone doing something about it now, but they weren't doing something about the bigger problem, right?
right.
That's the
So yeah, the fact that someone's doing something about something now, while but doing it about the minority of the case, while ignoring the majority of the case, seems like that would be normalizing, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So in the same sense now that we've gone through the analogy and you've been willing to admit that, I need you to explain to me why the Stop Asian Hate movement would be distinct from that analogy that we gave you. Tell me if first off, do you feel that there is any way where these analogies are incongruent?
Yeah, I think there's a huge number of ways.
Show me where they're incongruent then. Let's do that.
Right. So the cultural practice of um like divorcing somebody or breaking up with somebody when you have kids,
We didn't say
there's no
just divorcing or
hate.
we didn't say divorcing or breaking up. We said they were just abandoning them.
uh, Sure. I mean, it, yeah,
Married, they weren't even married. They weren't even married in the analogy. So,
right.
okay.
So you were with somebody who had a kid and you told them you're gonna take care of the kid and you leave and you don't do that, right?
Right.
Um, I think that, there's lots of ways that could be not cool. Um, but that's very different from, assaulting somebody because of their race. Like I don't think that those things are analogous, right? In terms of how we should deal with
This
them
is
with like
magic to me.
legislation or
So no,
something.
this is magic to me. So I think what you're saying is that these things aren't the exact same. But you understand when with analogies that not all of the factors of an analogy need to be identical, right? Like the idea is supposed to be, do the principles hold up, right? For example, if I say uh, digit is to finger as limb is to branch, it's like yes, like well, these are two different things. One of these is part of a human body. One of these things can move a lot, has a lot more freedom of movement. Like that, like there's so many things you could say are incongruent about it. But the point of the
Well, it's
analogy is to be talking about an extension from like the main part, which would be the hand, right? So in the same sense, the point of the analogy is to show some wrong being done, and both of these things we would agree are wrong. So simply saying one is violent and one's not does not mean that they're incongruent. The analogy still holds up, in that here is something that is wrong being done, and versus something that, in both analogies, there is a wrong being done that is condemned in both cases. I don't understand. Like, so
wait,
where's the
okay. So
incongruency?
are are you are you saying that we haven't had a movement to stop hate crimes against black people, and then we started having a movement to stop hate crimes against Asian people, and that's the problem?
I'm saying that there was legislation passed specifically with
Okay,
regards to Asians, and that legislation was not specifically towards black people, even though black people were literally the majority of them. Were the
sure. Okay.
majority of the
So
hate
now we're
crimes.
right. So now
So,
we're
in the
getting
same sense, in the analogy, making sure that we keep it consistent here, in the analogy, the legislation was to stop men abandoning women. I mean, stop women from abandoning their
okay.
families. If that's the
Could we
case,
could
then
we
that would
actually
be.
just throw away the
I
analogy?
don't want to. No, I don't.
I think
No,
we can
no, we can't.
grapple
No, we cannot. No,
directly
no,
with.
we cannot. We
I
cannot
don't
throw
think
away.
this is
No,
helpful.
we cannot. No, we cannot throw away the analogy, because you have a problem admitting things, and what we're seeing now is that if when we do it in the analogy, it's needed to do so. You need to do the analogy because you've already made up your mind, and your bias will not let you see past let you see past your bias when it comes to this other thing. So I need to do the analogy, which you've already agreed to, so that it forces you to recognize that you're being inconsistent. Because if you agree with the analogy and the two are congruent, to then disagree with the other thing is just your bias, or racism, or whatever the freak it is called, is causing this dissonance. I'm not saying you're racist. I'm saying whatever is causing the dissonance here, it's there's something that's
Sure.
mentally happening at a subconscious level there. And the reason why I need the analogy is to show you how you do agree with the principle. You're just unwilling to apply the principle to black people in this scenario.
Sure. I think you're being a little bit uncharitable
I'm
here.
not being uncharitable even in the slightest bit.
Let me speak a little bit.
Okay, you can listen.
Um,
But hold on, really quickly. I genuinely don't care if you feel I'm being uncharitable. I don't care. I know that what I'm trying to do is logically come to a deduction, and so I've come up with the principle and an analogy in order to get to this deduction. If you feel like my deduction is uncharitable, I don't care, because the goal of my deduction, the goal of my analogy, is not to be charitable. The goal of my analogy is to be consistent. And so, if you can show me where it's incongruent, or you can show me where the analogy is inconsistent, then I'm willing to entertain it. I'm not particularly interested in protecting your feelings in this scenario. I just want
that's
this to be logically consistent, and I don't care if it's particularly uncharitable.
that's fine. Okay. The reason I'm bringing up charitability is for the sake of discourse so that we can efficiently communicate. I'm not talking about my feelings. I'm talking
Okay.
about getting there efficiently, right? So there was an anti-AAPI hate bill,
Mm-hmm.
specifically related to the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a good thing. Does that normalize to some degree hate against non Asian Americans? Yeah, maybe it does.
Maybe.
I can grant that.
Maybe. What do you mean? Maybe.
Um, it does to some degree, sure. I
Okay.
would say it's still worth it to have an anti-API hate bill when there's this particular spike. And what I would like to see is rather than fuck this shouldn't exist, we should have like, okay, we need to expand this to other hate crimes. This needs to be a more comprehensive legislation rather than tearing this down, which was my original issue with a lot of things that I saw on Tariq's Instagram, which were less along the lines of, okay, this thing is good, but it needs to be expanded. My people are suffering as well. And also, hey, we're actually like the majority of the people who are like being, you know, being affected by this kind of thing. So it's like kind of weird that this hasn't already been done, right? Rather than
S-
like fuck this sucks, this shouldn't happen, which is more the feeling I got from
Yeah,
I
you
know I
got that feeling, and
shouldn't
that
look
feeling is
through.
accurate. No, you got that feeling. That feeling is accurate, and the reason why that feeling
Yeah.
is accurate is because he recognizes, like you've just slowly came around to admitting. By the way, I want you to recognize you did a complete 180. Originally, you were unwilling to admit that it was normalizing of black people to pass that anti-AAPI bill. So that's why you need these that's why you need analogies. It's because analogies help you to understand a principle, and if you're being honest, then when you start taking it back to the original point, then you can say, huh, well, I do feel this way. This principle holds up, and now let me apply it here. Wait, it is normalizing. That was the purpose of the analogy. So that's why you don't throw them away. Anyway, the reason why someone would be so hateful towards a bill that otherwise they might not have a problem with is because the bill specifically does normalize it. And anytime you have a bill that's normalizing hate against black people, who are already the largest recipient of all sorts of aggression and hatred and racism and hate crimes and discrimination and all of the other, and we have all of these things working against us. Any amount of hate, any amount of normalizing that hate is going to be met with vitriol from any conscious black person. And I think him being conscious and aware of the constant demonization of African Americans, the constant dismissive of our cries for freaking help, the constant moving of the goalposts every time we're trying to bring attention towards our issues. Someone being aware of that is going to be particularly responsive towards an anti-hate Asian movement when we recognize that that is normalizing. And that's why you have that vitriol. And for you, it's almost like you're dismissing it. Like, yeah, like, yes, it might be somewhat normalizing, but overall it's a good thing. It's not a good thing for black people, because what we recognize is that everything that we've ever fought for in this country has come through blood, sweat, and tears. Our right to vote was met with God knows how many literal deaths and murder, literal like evictions, all of the nonsense that we went through. The civil rights movement, literally we had John Lewis and other people being beaten in the head and tear gas and had dog sicked on them in order for us to be able to do that. We had to sacrifice our employment. We like literally all of these things that we had to go through at every step of the way. The long hot summer of 1967, where we're literally burning down cities, dying at the hands of police officers just to be able to get the ability to move next to different people, to be able to buy property so that they're not legally segregating our freaking housing. All of the things that we've ever fought for in every capacity has been at the cost of blood, sweat, and tears. There has never, ever been legislation passed for civil rights that hasn't been against the backdrop of abject violence, oftentimes with black people being the victims of said violence. When it came to the radicalization and the mobilization of African Americans and the Democrat Party within the state of California, it came at the hands of literal riots on the backdrop of a black person being killed unfairly, and then the LA riots literally changed the entire political landscape of the state of California, one of the most blue states in existence today. So every time when we get legislation passed, it's going to come at the cost of blood, sweat, tears, violence, and death. So if that's the case, for someone to sit here and normalize or minimize what something is happening that's normalizing hate crimes where death, violence, and bitterness is actually happening against African Americans, it's not a small thing that someone should just completely dismiss or look the other way for, or say, well, it's still a good thing overall because this is something we can stand behind, even if it's going to result in now more work, meaning more blood, more sweat, more tears, more problems, all of these things in order for us to undo this seemingly passive, seemingly innocuous thing that you're trying to minimize. That's why it's such a problem.
Okay, so there was a logical connection there that I missed. I was with you for like 99.99999% of what you're saying. 100% agree, hard fucking agree. Okay. The place where you have to undo this anti-hate bill to have other
You have to undo the normalization. No, not that you have to undo
Okay.
the bill. You have to undo the normalization.
Okay. So here's my issue. I'll see if I can distill this as clearly as possible. An anti-African American hate bill, would that normalize hate toward Asian Americans?
No, it would not.
Why not?
I'm sorry. If there was just an anti-African American hate, no, I don't think it would normalize it against Asian Americans. And here's the reason why: because African Americans are the mean. We are the vast majority of the recipients of hate crimes. So if we recognize that there's something that's happening to the super majority of something, then that means that we would probably do something to address it. In the same way, in the analogy, if we were to make a bill that was specifically aimed at preventing men from abandoning women, when women make up only 10% of the people who are abandoning people, it makes sense that we would make a bill to address what is the majority. Not every bill is going to fix literally everything, but when we recognize that something is happening majority towards something, making a bill to address the majority of these recipients of something sounds like a reasonable thing to do and does not necessarily normalize something against the other ones, because anti-Asian hate is already super abnormal. They only made up at that point 4% of all hate crimes. So it was already hyper abnormal, already hyper minimal. So that's why it wouldn't be normalizing in any capacity. No.
Okay, so I don't think that that's a principle you want to stand behind.
Give
Because
me an example where I would disagree with
let's
that.
say we had an economic relief package for the majority of people who are in economic bad issues. Like we could look at the stats, but my guess it would probably be white people. So if you had a bill that was like, we're gonna take all the poor white people and we're gonna give them some money, that I bet that would be the majority of people.
It
So
depends.
I don't.
No. Because if we were doing it based on proportions, then yeah, I would probably be fine with that.
Okay, based on proportions.
Sure.
Okay. We could look at some of the stats, and we could look at some of.
Do you think that proportionally more white people are poor than black people?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was more looking at like
proportionally the stats on Asian American hate.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're proportionally significantly lower than like almost every other demographic in the country, both proportionally and just raw numbers. So no, that doesn't hold up at all. So again, I very much stand behind the idea that if you're doing something to address the majority of a recipient of a problem, that I'm probably not going to have necessarily a problem with that, as long as you're addressing the majority, because already the majority, I mean, doing something to fix the majority of a problem isn't normalizing for everyone else, not even a little bit.
Sure. Okay, I could probably get behind that in a lot of cases. I would have to think more about, if I can think of cases where that's like really blatantly problematic. But as a general principle, if you're finding cases where people are proportionately massively disadvantaged and helping those people first, that seems like not such a bad thing.
I agree. If they're proportionally the majority of a disadvantage, yeah, that sounds like a great thing. We do it all the time in this country. Like when we decide to help like the super duper poor, right? When it comes to like welfare, and we have like means tested programs specifically with the intention of helping the most marginalized. I think that makes sense. The problem comes when you like. In doing so, that doesn't normalize necessarily like, other people, other groups, right? Like you're helping the most disenfranchised, and it sounds like that would be a reasonable thing to do. It only becomes a problem, again, when you decide, look, we're going to help the hyper minority within the minority, right? We're going to get like just a small subset of these individuals, and we're going to help them, even though they're not the biggest problem, they're not the majority of the problem, they're not the majority per capita, none of that. We're just going to help them, and eventually maybe we'll get around to the people who we've literally historically, verbally articulated hatred towards within the country. Like it just sounds to me like we've literally said, "You're not a human, so we can treat you badly." We've never told you're not a human, but you're not a human. So person A is not a human, so we're allowed to do everything we want to them. Now we finally said, okay, they're human. We're going to continue to do everything we want to them. Person B, we've always told them they were human. In fact, we've done a lot to help them. We've literally labeled them the model minority. We've literally created infrastructure specifically at aiming at like dealing with any of the problems we've ever done. We've redressed the issues for them. But now someone else is tripping on them, so we got to make sure we really go ahead and maintain this thing. That means that you're still dehumanizing the other person because they're still the majority of the problem there, and it's normalizing. And I think that normalization is going to be a problem, and that's why Tariq Nasheed is so vocal against it. And let's not forget, by the way, that thing that we were talking about, that LA riot, that was at the hands of an Asian person. Where we have all of this historic discrimination of Asians against black people. We have that. We know that. We have data for that. We have proof of that, right? That's literally what sparked the riots. And on top of that, incorrectly, plenty of times, the Asians, the face of the anti-Asian hate was specifically about black people. And you had Asian people, Asian thought leaders within their community, literally calling on African Americans, saying black people need to do more when it comes to supporting Asians. They literally were making those statements despite the rampant anti-blackness within the Asian community. And then the stats later came out from the FBI, clearly detailing the fact that the vast majority of these hate crimes were white. So even within this movement aimed at stopping their hate, they were incorrectly and unfairly demonizing black people, even within that movement. I think we have every reason to be vitriolic towards that movement. I think we have every reason to say that everything that was happened, and the way that it was handled, all of it, the way that it was painted, all of it was absolutely disgusting. I think we have every right to be that way. I stand with Tariq Nasheed 100% on that specific issue. 100%.
Okay. So I don't know a lot about movements surrounding those riots back then. I was discussing more like current day what's going on, and I saw people. I, of course, shouldn't be reading comments on like an Instagram thread, but and I was saying things like I was seeing people say things like, you know, why should we care about like um, you know uh, anti-Asian hate. Like I never see like an Asian person at like a BLM march and stuff like that. And
Sure.
um, that's the kind of divisive thing where just like the system wins from that. Like the system wins from um, the idea that different oppressed peoples should be at each other's throats rather than at
That's not being at
the
someone's throat.
actual system itself. Oh,
That's not
okay,
being at someone's throat.
okay,
Showing apathy is different than being at someone's throat, right?
sure,
Okay. And
um,
do you think that
sure,
there's merit to
fair.
the idea that if I've been catching hell from some people and this person has been largely apathetic and contributing towards the hell that I've been catching, do you think that it's reasonable for me to say, if that person then starts catching hell, that I'm probably going to need them to show some solidarity with my issues that they've contributed to and been apathetic to otherwise before I start showing sympathy towards them? Is that a reasonable position, do you think?
No, I think that is reasonable.
So what's wrong with the
The thing
comment
I
then?
take
Because that was
issue
a comment that you mentioned to me. What was wrong with that comment?
right. So the issue is that I have seen photos. Maybe this is a marginal thing. Maybe those were maybe those were things that bubbled up to the top to push a certain narrative, but I have seen like groups of Asian people at BLM marches saying like we stand with you, stuff like that.
Mm.
Um so I feel like
So yeah, I guess what we
yeah.
can say is no one would ever make the statement there were zero Asians at like the BLM march, right?
Mhm,
Like our BLM marches. Doesn't don't no one would ever make that statement. Um,
mhm.
but I do think that there hasn't been like a significant portion of solidarity from the Asian American community. Very often, the Asian American community has upheld, supported, and lifted. Uplifted white supremacy within this country. A lot of times, they've reaped the benefits of supremacy, which has literally been largely why they've probably stayed out of it. So I think pointing out to a few individual Asians, I haven't seen a lot of support when it came from Asian American thought leaders, Asian American senators, Asian American representatives. I haven't seen a lot of solidarity when it comes to standing against white supremacy from them politically. There's been obvious intersection between like African Americans and Jewish Americans when it came to like the riots and the Long Hot Summer of 1967 and just the original Freedom Riders. There were Jewish Americans standing with Black Americans as they were marching across that bridge, right? So we recognize that there have been historic alliances between other people. We've seen historic alliance between Latin Americans and African Americans on various occasions. I do not know, I'm not aware of any such similarity when it comes to Asians with solidarity. Not that there are no Asians, but in general, there has not been any, in my opinion, any marked alliances between African Americans and Asian Americans when it came to the black struggle. Are you aware of any of that?
No, I'm not. That's not something I've looked into. That's something we could
Yeah, we could. Let's
try to
do
find.
that.
Um, I think again, I think what I said last time is like I'm that borderline naive, very friendly person who wants to like build borders and say shit like if you're gonna say something like from the black community to the Asian community, do better, something along those lines. Um, like a call in, even a call out. Um, but what the tone that I got was more along the lines of like, this is our enemy too. and that feels counterproductive to me.
Well,
Again,
from the tweet that you gave me, that wasn't it. And you were willing to call that tweet being at someone's throat. I would probably need a better example because the example you
yeah,
gave was seemed like
it was on Instagram.
okay. Well, yeah,
Um,
I don't know. That
yeah, no. I mean, I'm not trying to like I'm not trying to say that you should have seen this or will agree with me or whatever. And again, I guess my assessment of a tone, whatever, doesn't necessarily count for a lot for you. Um, um, that's that was overall the message that I got. There's a lot of things that you've informed me of
but
where that sentiment comes from.
sure, but I think
Uh,
I don't know. It is hard for me to put a lot of stock in in your interpretation of that message because originally the first thing that you presented in this conversation was specifically someone saying, "Why should I care about them when I haven't seen them supporting me?" And you call that at their throats. So again, I know that you've walked that back now, but originally that was your original assessment. So it makes me a little bit hesitant or reluctant, I guess, to accept your assessment in
sure.
this way, and I would need a better example.
hmm No, I don't think you should accept my assessment as a. This was my own assessment. It should carry as far as my own view of this.
Yeah, are you willing to
Um,
support that? You want to pull? Well, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So I guess yeah. I don't know. I'm not gonna base a movement off of like Twitter niggas or Instagram or any of that kind of stuff. I do think like solidarity needs to be shown, and solidarity needs to be shown, and I just don't think that we've had that. From the Asian
mhm,
American community, actually, to the contrary, I remember there was recently they talked about Chinese Americans specifically had like contributed like $50,000 towards like a Proud Boys movement, which we obviously see how anti-black and white nationalist the Proud Boys movement has been. So I don't know. I think even still politically, we are still able to see and trace financial incentives from Asian Americans when it comes to anti-blackness, specifically within the hair community, and just all over. It seems to be really prevalent.
mhm. Well, sure. I mean, I'm sure there's a number of cases in both directions, where there are Asian Americans who are contributing to causes that help the black community, and there are Asians contributing to causes that hurt the black community, and vice versa
Can
with
you show me where the
black
Asian Americans are
Americans.
contributing towards the causes that help the community? Because I haven't seen very much of that.
Sure. I mean, I could try to
Should we make that the
Google some.
conversation for next week? Let's look into just the Asian American and African American historic relations. Would you like that to be the
Sure,
topic
sure.
next week?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that I don't know a ton about, so that seems like definitely something to learn about. Yeah.
Okay, that'll be our topic for next week.
hmm
Um, yeah, I don't know, man. Tariq Nasheed might be the go. I think the more we've discussed this, the more in favor of him I am. Especially if like he's collecting people who have those kind of comments and the realization that we need to start making sure that if we're going to be looking for alliances as we've typically done, then we need to make sure that we're holding our allies accountable and we're not just giving away our political power and our political support to individuals who can't stand us as much as they can throw us. Um,
hmm
I mean, as far as they can throw us, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
you ain't throwing no niggas. So
I think my message is less like, oh, these people should get a pass. Like in the same way that I don't think like white Americans should get a pass for, like we should just say that, oh, white Americans have done enough to support black people. I don't think that that's a statement I would ever make.
yeah,
That's insane, right?
they've done the opposite,
Of
right?
course not. Right? Of course. So that's not that's not the statement that I think is it could ever be reasonable or could ever be justified. I think the statement, again, kind of the exact same thing would be like white people do better. It would be more along those lines. Um, how does that sound as a
Which is the idea that I would never make I don't like the way it sounds. Just white people do
sure, sure,
better.
sure.
But like
I
yeah,
agree
the
with that.
idea that like everyone should be doing better to like support one
hmm
another and things like that. Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. But I
hmm
think when like one person has been particularly like a source of a lot of the injuries in the race relations, I would think that that person should probably have the onus on them to probably make the first step and to be a little bit more proactive at like trying to get us towards on the right path.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah. Yeah.
any
That's very
attestation
true.
from that individual at someone's reluctance in moving in their direction, I think is probably it should be dismissed because it's warranted that people would be reluctant in moving in their direction given like the historic past. I think it's the onus is on you to move and work through whatever the reluctance is in that individual to gain them as an ally, to win them as an ally. Because at this point, when you've been so injurious, yeah, I think it's reasonable to expect that people are going to be, standoffish.
Hmm.
That's your fault.
Yeah.
That's your doing. It's like if you abandon your family and your children don't want a relationship with you, you can't like extend your hand and then they slap it away and they be like, "Well, I tried." It's like, no, you did the injury. You got to work through that. That's a reasonable response. I think in the same
Yeah.
sense, I think
Yeah.
niggas being
Yeah.
resistant towards being allies to Asians, towards showing them support. I think that some of these things seem justified, unless maybe I don't know. Maybe this week we'll do the research and then maybe I'll come away with a new perspective. I don't think that's going to be the case, but we'll see.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's entirely fair. I think there's a certain certain question of like, so um let's say if it were the case that um that I've even read correctly what it is that Tariq is putting out as content, because I didn't spend a huge amount of time on his Instagram, but I just scrolled through for a bit. um but let's say that he even were putting out the sentiment like, the Asian community like hasn't stood with us, they're not good allies, stuff like that. um
Is it accurate?
yeah, I guess the question would be like, is it accurate? Is it inaccurate? If it were inaccurate, then it would be kind of pushing toward burning a bridge
Mm-hmm.
where it shouldn't be. If it's accurate, I feel like my personality would tend toward not going in that direction in any case, but I recognize that that's that's me specifically. That's not something that I could try to tell somebody else that this is how they should do their thing. If it's
Sure.
accurate, then on one hand you can say like that's fair.
Okay.
Um,
Look. Here's the deal. Ultimately, it's not necessarily for me. I don't really care about personality as much as is. If it's accurate, then I think it's perfectly fine to disseminate. If it's inaccurate, then it's obviously a problem to disseminate. Not everything is going to be expedient, but it doesn't matter. If it's accurate, I think it's well within a person's rights to do so, be it expedient or not. And I would never demonize someone's platform for sharing accurate information. I think the truth will
yeah.
set you free in like 99% of situations. I don't think
Hmm.
I don't look at inconvenient truths and then I don't run away from inconvenient truth. If it's true, it's
Sure.
true, and if it's true, that means now that gives us more information on what we need to work through. And I
Hmm.
think so. If Tariq Nasheed was sharing the gospel, that is the anti-blackness within the Asian American community, I don't know that I would probably see any problems with that, because then that would be meaning now more people will be informed, and now more people are aware of how to um, challenge Asian Americans on
Hmm.
what is required in order for them to be allies.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a really fair. It could even be, it could be a light that somebody could see. They could see themselves in it and say, "Oh shoot, I've got to do better," etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I can definitely see that perspective. Um, yeah, thank you for um, helping give me a lens to understand that better.
Yep. Okay. This is a heated one.
Yeah. Did you want to look at any of the documentary? We don't we don't
Man,
have to do
I feel like
that.
today we've kind of spent it, and I think I'm
Uh-huh.
hungry as hell, and I think we should let's do the documentary Thursday.
Okay. Oh, Thursday?
Is it a bad
No,
day?
I'm gonna be busy as hell this week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's gonna have to be next week. But yeah, we could do some of both. We could say like, hey, let's watch like 20 minutes of this. Let's see what we can kind of read about in terms of like Asian American and Black American relations. and kind of with respect to different civil rights struggles.
Hmm.
Um,
We can do that
that's
Monday.
definitely.
Okay, here's what I need too. I think this might even
Mhm.
be a little bit more beneficial. How about you
Oh yeah.
link me that stream to Buck Breaking, and I'll watch it independently. And if you have time during the week or just whatever, you watch it, and then we can discuss it
Yeah.
like on Monday. That would be
Hmm.
probably better than us airing it necessarily on our platforms. Not
Sure.
that I have
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
problem
Yeah.
airing anything from Tariq Nasheed because he's amazing, but yeah,
Mhm. Okay. Here. Yeah. No. No. That sounds great. Let me send it over right now. Yeah, because I mean, it's gonna take like 4 times as long for us to watch it together,
sure,
like as as
exactly.
for us to, yeah. Like either way, we're gonna be pausing and unpausing and giving a lot of commentary. But if we're pausing, giving commentary, and then talking about it, and then
Yeah,
it's gonna they're like 10 times as long, I think. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that make more sense, and then that way we'll have like an hour and a half maybe to discuss just our impressions of the film and
Hmm.
specifics in the film if we want to get into that. But yeah, I think that'd do really good.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, man. Um, all right. See you next Monday.